All right, everyone, the red light is on and we are recording. This is Mark back from another episode of the Veteran Semi-Professional. So today's an interview episode where I'm interviewing a veteran about their life and career after the military, all in effort to help you if you're trying to think about what post-military life looks like once you can figure out what am I going to do once I can put my hands back in my pockets, grow out my hair, and start wearing these things called quote unquote civilian clothes. This is a show for you. So I talk to people about, what their journey has been like, leaving the military and what their career's been like afterwards to show you and your family, what the possibilities are that out there and kind of give you a sense of a game plan of, what a career trajectory, excuse me, stumbling my words today, might look like for you after the uniform. So super excited for today's guest. So Peter Mann, if you could take a minute and introduce yourself, I would appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. I guess for me, I was in the Navy. I went to college on a ROTC scholarship, kind of obviously just rolled right into the Navy. I got out in the 1990s. I had zero business experience. And so, really spent 10 years working for some larger companies and then eventually got into entrepreneurship after that, once I had really more of the confidence. But that's, kind of at a high level, kind of my, career trajectory.
Yeah. And what did you do in the Navy?
So, yeah, I was a surface warfare officer. I was on the USS McCandless, based out of Norfolk. And that's really the only ship I was on, but I was on it for like three and a half years.
Yeah.
So I was communications officer and then gunnery officer.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, my dad was a Navy guy also, actually. Well, cool. So I was at the first to ask people about, your transition from the Navy. Can we talk about, what went well, what didn't go well, if you have any, bright spots you want to point out for people or speed bumps that you may want to, put on people's radar as they're coming in behind you.
Yeah, so for me, it took me, gosh, a few months or 4 months or so, 5 months to find a job. And, in the 90s, I think things changed after 9/11 in terms of really respect for having military experience. It was a little bit different. I was met with a lot of, well, how does that relate to what we're doing in this office building, right? And and I think what's really important is really being able to translate experience so it's not lost. I mean, for me, I basically relied on my college degree to get my first job, and I didn't really have a good way of communicating really what I did in the military and how that relates to um, the workplace. And now looking back, I kind of see maybe there's some ways I could have framed it a little bit better in terms of the experience and managing people and kind of operations type experience. But when I first came out, I wasn't coached or trained on how to do any of that. So it kind of made it probably harder than it should have been. But also I think the mood and the perspective on military experience is different now, which is for the better than it was back then.
Yeah, very, very much agree with you. I'm glad to see the sentiment has kind of changed. And my intuition is that that feeling probably ebbs and flows based on, wartime experiences. We're still kind of riding some of like the post 9/11. We still have people deployed overseas and everything, and we're still kind of riding some of that wave as as a veteran community, if you will. Um, but I have a feeling probably that's gonna ebb off at some point. Um, but it's kind of good to know that that has changed, and I know there's a lot more systems and policies in place for people going through that exit than you had getting out when you did. Um, but that challenge you described of how do I kind of talk about what being a communications officer on a surface warfare vessel, how does that translate into something that's impactful into your civilian organization? That's still very much a problem and a challenge that people have. And there's coaching and mentoring people can help you with along the way. Um, but I think it's also incumbent on the service member, the veteran, to look at and understand who is this organization, what are kind of the words that they're looking for, what's kind of their culture, and how can I maybe start communicating my experience into that? It's a double-edged sword there for sure. So what was your kind
Yeah,
of first
definitely.
post?
It's a different language.
What was your
Oh,
first?
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you got. We might have like a second or two lag here. What was your first post military career? Like, how did you kind of get your foot in the door there?
So I applied for a number of different positions, but I ended up working for a manufacturing company. It was more of a family, type business, garment manufacturing for the medical industry for the most part. So I mean, they were $100 million business. It was pretty decent size company, but again, I leveraged my math degree, computer programming experience, and that was kind of what they were looking for in terms of operations and creating programs to manage inventory, and things like that. And so, in terms of the military experience, it really wasn't as impactful as as that was. But now looking back, I see that there were things that were in the military that I just really wasn't aware of that were very applicable to the business marketplace. I just wasn't able to leverage those. But if I were to do it over, I think my approach would be a little bit different. But I think training on, there's military lingo and then there's like business world lingo, and they're not the same. And so I think having some awareness for that, but being able to speak to, your successes in ways that connect with what the company's looking for.
Yeah, that's always a challenge, and I think one of the problems that I always kind of see with veterans on like their resume or they're trying to convert it is the military's language for measuring success is like much more tied to your level of responsibility than necessarily like direct level of impact. Whereas in the civilian organization, okay, great, you were in charge of this division, um, this formation, whatever. Like, what did you do there though? Like, what was the value you added by being in there? And that can be a tough part because then now you kind of have to start looking and saying, okay, what was the difference that Mark, using myself here as an example, made when I was in charge? How can I kind of start to measure and quantify that? I think like one of the tough parts for veterans in particular is, we were kind of trained in service to do everything and think of everything through the lens of a team of, my unit accomplished this, my division did this. And now you kind of have to start getting used to saying, okay, yes, like our unit did this, but what did I do? Because somebody's hiring you is not, they're not hiring your team, they're hiring you. And so they want to know like what you accomplished in there.
Yeah, exactly. And when you step back and look at it, a company when they're hiring a position, it's they have work to be done or a problem to be solved, and really, how do you position yourself as the solution to that problem? And then, what have you done in the past that aligns with them getting comfortable that you can continue to perform um, whatever that particular task is. And so I think it's really important if have a resume or you have experience that you're speaking to, it's completely relevant to what the company is looking for, for why they even have the position in the first place. And for me, I remember in the Navy we had POA and M, so plan of action and milestones, and that's like super valuable in businesses in terms of getting things done. um, and it's that's something that I think is an advantage to being in the military, in that you have that as a framework or a background, and people in the business world don't come into the business world with that. And so it's I think just really trying to leverage your strengths but understand who your audience is, and being able to position yourself as really the solution to what they're looking for.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Something I'm kind of curious on about you. You say when you got out, you kind of leaned into your interest of math and computer programming. And so this was, I think you said you got out in like the mid '90s or so. Um,
Yep.
so
Yep.
computers are still pretty new on the scene then. Did you So is it something you just kind of self-taught yourself? Was that like just like a hobby you were into where you kind of started learning about programming?
Yeah, I got in pretty early. Way back, gosh, it's probably like eighth or ninth grade. I would, and my brother is the one that actually got the computer, but I kind of taught myself how to program, and it's just, to me, it's just kind of fun figuring it out, and it's like problem solving, but being able to do things with it. And so, um, I think an ability to figure things out is also another great skill that companies are look for, that, is not necessarily evident in the civilian world. And for me, like, computer programming was, a way to, solve problems, but do things more efficiently and more scalable. And so that's, a really valuable skill, and really leverage that quite significantly in my career.
Yeah, and there's kind of 2 points you brought up about like the attractiveness of programming. There's usually the 2 points that I hear from anyone who's gotten into programming of, okay, I have this task that I'm trying to do. I want to do it more efficiently. Okay, this is a problem that I can engineer a solution to, via programming mechanics somehow to help me do this thing more efficiently. And then it's just a matter of really just kind of figuring it out, right? And there are lots of ways that, for everyone listening, you probably had to figure something out at some point, shape, time, or fashion, right? Of this widget on the ship is broken, or the radio's down today. We've got to figure out a solution to make something happen, and it's usually in a resource constrained environment. There's usually a time crunch. Someone maybe pressuring you to get it done faster than you might think is possible, and that's a really valuable skill. And just comfort with problem, and like a willingness to want to solve problems is a very valuable thing for anyone out there.
Yeah, and I would add, just an awareness. There's this thing called game theory. I don't know if you're that familiar with it, but there's um, finite games and infinite games. And finite game is like where the rules are defined and the players are known. It's like playing a board game, or even school and the military to a certain extent are more finite games. But the business world is an infinite game where there is no roadmap. There aren't, everything's not documented for how things are to be done. There's the rules can change, the players can change, and so it's a completely different game. And I think being able to understand that and being able to be flexible and look for different solutions without, this is the way we've always done things, but finding better ways to do things. Innovation, I think, is really important, especially in such a competitive marketplace that most businesses are in. And that's a change, I think, going from, in a sense, going from the military to like a civilian job, but really understanding, like, where can you innovate, or what experiences you've had in finding, new ways of doing things. I think is super important.
So I'm only mildly aware of some of the top line theories of game theory, um, but I've never heard the I haven't thought about life in the military and kind of life post military as these an infinite game versus a finite game. But I think it makes total sense, and I think one of the things that can intimidate people about leaving the military is going from that finite game where there are rules and the players and you kind of know the procedures, to the infinite game where, for better or for worse, the world is your oyster. You just got to decide how you want to crack it and eat it yourself, and that can be intimidating if you're used to playing in that finite set of rules.
Yeah, and I think it's important, really, just to have awareness that that's the case, because you could be so used to the structure of something and going to something that's completely unstructured, or like like for me, it was perfect, but I know that's not for everyone. But I think it's just understanding the game that you're playing, and it's a way to identify opportunities and to kind of be successful, in the job market or in the workplace.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about got out of the Navy, you kind of had your first post-military career and everything. And you worked there, I think you said for about 10 years or so. And then eventually, you decided to start something yourself. Can you talk a little bit about, identifying that opportunity and then starting to act on that first entrepreneurial endeavor?
Sure. Yeah. So I worked, for that company. Really, that first company was really just 18 months. And to me, it was a stepping stone to companies I wanted to work for. And so I worked for a couple Fortune 100 tech companies, the last one being Dell. And this was in the early 2000s and the dot-com bubble burst. And it was pretty challenging time in the tech industry. We were just every 2 or 3 weeks going through another round of layoffs, and it was a challenging environment. And for me, I'd always wanted to start a business, but I didn't feel I had the confidence or experience to do that. But when the dot-com bubble burst and this great job didn't seem so great anymore, it kind of gave me the push to go and start something new. And so I started a kind of a side business with this other guy. And so from, during the day my day job was at Dell. And then from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., I worked on the new business. And after 6 or 7 months, it got to be, of the size to where I could, easily leave Dell and then just move into that full time, without taking on the risk of going from a salary to zero with a family. It was that to me seemed pretty risky, but, in kind of, getting it to a point where it was almost self-sustaining, it gave me just really the confidence, like I'm just going to go for it now.
Yeah, I think the way you're kind of describing the landscape that you were entering into at that time, there's a lot of parallels going on right now, right? Like, if you look at the headlines
Yeah.
now, lots of layoffs going on in the tech world. We seems to be back and forth on like whether or not a recession is actually going to happen or not. But the broader economic feeling doesn't feel super great right now. And this is always a period in time when businesses get built because people feel that uncertainty and they say, man, maybe it's time that I can try and build something for myself and create a new opportunity versus, waiting for that day when I get that layoff email or notification from somebody. So I'm a sucker for a good
Yeah, you
origin
definitely
story.
don't want to wait.
I'm always a sucker for a good
Yeah,
origin
you
story.
definitely don't want to wait.
Sorry, I might have a second or two going on there. I'm always a sucker for a good origin story of like what was the business you were working on and how did the idea, like where did you find the opportunity, how did it come about?
Yeah, so when I was at Dell, I was developing functionality for Dell.com, and so I was very familiar with internet websites. This was early 2000s. This is like before Facebook.
Yeah.
Websites it was a new thing. Google ads cost 5 cents a click. It was a different it was a different time. It's kind of like if you look at AI right now, that's kind of what the internet was like, early 2000s. It was the early days. And so I think when there's new technology and it's in the early days, there's opportunities if you can kind of see what the opportunities are. And so the business was e-commerce sites selling products that required more of a consultative type of a sale because, at that time, Amazon was around, but it was still mostly a book seller and they were selling some other products, but they didn't have a phone number. And we were like, oh, if we sell tankless water heaters or, portable air conditioners or air purifiers or some of these other products that people have questions about, we'll sell it online, but we'll also have a kind of inside sales team that can answer questions and take orders. And that's what we did. And we just kind of, branched out into some different, types of sites and categories. But that's really what the business was. And we started off reselling other people's products. And then after maybe 2-3 years, went directly to some factories in China and branded our own products. But that was kind of evolution of the process. But I really, learned a lot at Dell in terms of how do you launch a product and then how do you market and sell online.
Yeah. That's always I see the challenge a lot of people who, working inside of a large company and then, okay, I'm doing XYZ inside of this large organization. Oh, I can then go do XYZ on my own. And that isn't always a direct, one-to-one transfer. Just because when you're working inside of a large organization, there's lots of support and structures and things around that can make something easier. But it's a whole other skill set to kind of have to do it all yourself, especially in the early days when you're probably engineering, marketing, people management, all the kind of stuff all at once. That's a whole other set of skills that are kind of compiling on top of one another.
Yeah, exactly. You have to know how all the pieces fit together and you have to be able to do everything. Like, and you don't have the marketing budget that the big companies have. And, um, but even now there's with social media, even TikTok or, um, YouTube, and there's ways that you can be known or get your name out there. It's just, and marketing to me is the most fascinating thing because it's ever changing. And it's, if you do it right, you can compete with the bigger brands or the well-known companies that are super well funded. They're just not as nimble or flexible in terms of changing or adapting to the times, and so that always creates opportunities. But for me, I really worked for 10 years to really understand the different aspects of business before I even ventured off into it. And so it's not a sprint. It's more like a marathon kind of a kind of a thing. You don't have to crush it like the first year. It's more around really understanding, I think, where you're wanting to go, and then realizing you have a lot of time to get there. You don't have to, it's more about, how do you keep staying in the game and getting better and kind of, doing what you like to do.
Something I was kind of curious about in the start of new ventures also, it sounded like you had a co-founder or some type of business partner who you launched this with. Is that right? How did you
Yeah,
all go ahead?
yes, yeah, I co-founded it with another person, which was kind of nice since I wasn't just me doing it by myself, since I'd never done a business before, and he had, had one or two other previous businesses that he had run, so he kind of knew some things that I didn't know. I came from big company, kind of what you were talking about, where we have like all the resources available in all the different departments. He was used to running startups, and so it was a way for me to step into that space.
And how did you all find each other and connect on the idea and decide, okay, this is one a product like a venture we want to launch, but then also this is a person that I want to do this with.
Yeah, so I met him through like a mutual friend, the guy I went to college with, that he knew in, I guess, um another way. I guess they were in some kind of leadership program together, and so he connected us together, and we met for lunch over several months, kind of talking through different ideas, and we gelled pretty well, and so it seemed like a good fit. And so that was really how we got started. But I really, in retrospect, really didn't know him super well when we started the business. We were just, having lunch meetings talking about shared interests in business. Um, and then, what I would say is after 7 years and working together, it kind of like started off, we were all kind of in sync moving together. And then you start to see different opportunities in the business. And there was maybe 5 or 6 years in, kind of, we both saw different paths for the way forward, and that kind of led to, it's like, all right, I'll just bow out and sell my half of the business and do what I want to do, and you can take it the way the way you want to take it.
Yeah, something I'm kind of curious about too is you were working on this for, it sounds like maybe a couple of years while you still had a full-time job. Um, and you're grinding away on it until there's an inflection point where like, okay, this is enough to to justify leaving the kind of steady job to go pursue this venture. Can you just talk through a little bit about like what that what you were thinking in that process? Like, what was the decision point of, okay, I've got to, this thing just seems to be going enough, because there's usually a little bit of a gap there of, okay, the business seems to be taking off, but, and I know that if I go into it full time, it's probably going to get better with me working on it full time. But at least usually at the start, there's probably gonna be like a little bit drop in income compared to what I'm making in my full time job. Just talk a little bit about that transition period and how you kind of weigh the pros and cons of it.
Yeah. So, for me, I had two little kids at the time. And so, and it was the main salary for the family. And so I was a little bit concerned jumping into the unknown, without, some degree of confidence for salary. And so, really it was only 6 or 7 months, I think, to really get to where it took off, because it was, early days of e-commerce. The competition wasn't that tough, for at least what I was used to from Dell. We were competing with HP and like big companies, and I went into like water heaters and air purifiers where it was all mom and pop kind of companies. And so, it got to where it was, I could replace about 3/4 of the salary, which it happened, 6, 7 months, which to me is super fast. And then it's like, all right, well, we're far enough along that I can just say goodbye to Dell and just go into that full time. And, I see a path forward for how I could, catch up to my Dell salary, pretty quickly. And so that's kind of like how it went down. I was also, it was really just more of a financial thing. And, and it was a way to build the business without really having to put a lot of money into it. It was just time. Um, and we got lucky because the timing was right with the way e-commerce was really just starting off. I think if we were to start that kind of a business now, it may not, I don't know, maybe with, social media, maybe it could take off if you have the right product and you have a following. But again, there's skills in that, and it takes a little bit of time. But it was really what I wanted to do, and I just put forth the effort, and I think in a way I was kind of lucky. It all kind of worked out.
And at least for my notes that I have, you bootstrapped that first business. So can you talk through um, the decision to, was there like a hard line decision of we're going to bootstrap this thing totally, or was there conversations about maybe we start seeking some outside investment or something? I'm just kind of curious what that fundraising decision point might have been like.
Yeah, we wanted to bootstrap it. Like anytime you take on investors, you have someone else to respond to. And it's like I was
Right.
going into it for autonomy. And then if you go into it with the idea of autonomy was what was so appealing to me, to control your destiny. And then you have like somebody that gives you money that's then telling you what you can do. I'm kind of almost back to where I was before. And so, it kind of drove the choice of, we were not investing in our own products that we were making. We were really reselling other folks' products to really understand the markets and the products in the marketplaces. And then, it was later that we, did more investment into product design and development, but that was, a few years later. Um, and so, without having to take salaries from the business from the first 6 or 7 months, we just reinvested everything back into the business. And so we didn't have to take, that's the benefit of having a job while you're doing this, is it's like, it doesn't require profitability. It's, you just, or if you do make a profit, you reinvest it in, you just slowly build it. It's difficult if you have a fairly high salary and you're trying to get that out of the business. You really can't build the business very well, or it's difficult to build it on debt. And so that's kind of I'd rather work 2 jobs than have to go raise money, which is a whole nother job. and then
Yeah.
be responsible to respond to someone about why I'm doing what I'm doing. Um, so but that was me. I think anytime you give away equity early on, it's really expensive money you're giving out. And the folks that give you money, kind of, money in a sense is a commodity, but when someone gives you money, it's their money and they kind of let you know. And so really didn't want to be part of that game. It just seemed it's kind of not the environment I wanted to be in. So we kind of stuck it out with, kind of just working a lot of hours and sweat equity to, avoid that.
I think that's a really important thing to just think about, and like what's going to you as like the entrepreneur, someone who's maybe going through this decision process of like what is the work environment relationship that I want to have here. I interviewed someone once who he was like, I want to bring on venture capital and I want to like ride the rocket ship and grow this thing and like that's what I want to do. And he was fine with that. Someone like yourself is more like, I'm doing this more for like the sense of autonomy and like building something for myself that I have a place to work in. And taking all that money to ride the rocket ship isn't as important to me. I think that's a something like you got to take a hard look at yourself as a as a founder and entrepreneur to understand where where's my personality and like my personal goals and ambitions going to fit best into this business equation, in particular when it comes to taking on funds from outside sources.
Yeah, I agree. It's, I think, understanding yourself and really what you're wanting to get out of it, because there's no one right way to do it. And it's like, I've known plenty of folks that have raised money and, built some, big businesses. And then, sometimes you have to go out and raise another round and then raise another round. And fundraising can turn into a full-time job. And so you have to know what you're signing up for. As part of that. And for me, if you're say 30 when you get out of the military, you really have another 40-ish years of working. And that's kind of what I was thinking is like, you don't have to crush it in year one. It's like a
Right.
40 or 30, even if you got out at 50, you could work another 20, 25 years. And so, it's like, what makes you happy? And what is, I think those are really important questions to get clear on before you jump into something and you start to when you take money, you're kind of working for someone else. And so it depends. Like there's some cases you really need to grow fast and you really need a lot of money, and it's the only way to get it or the only way to do it. But if that's not really what you're wanting to do, you could do more of the slower path, which is kind of more the way that I've done it.
Super cool. A lot of good stuff in there. Can you talk a little bit about what you're working on now? Because it sounds like you got a really cool business manufacturing in the United States. Talk a bit like what you're building now.
Yeah, so when I started this business, I really wanted to focus on indoor air quality, and that was important to me because my son, when he was an infant, really struggled with asthma, and
Mm-hmm.
I was able to see how important proper indoor air quality was for his quality of life. And so, I started it off with some of my relationships in building air purifiers with contract manufacturers in China and the US. And then when COVID hit, it's just the whole thing just kind of blew up because people were looking for better indoor air quality and looking
Yeah.
for solutions to clean the air for COVID and whatnot. And so the whole market just kind of just
Yeah.
kind of took off. And in that process, there was some folks that I'd met 6-7 years ago that were in the electric motor business. And so this guy, I guess, built up his motor company, sold it, retired, and then came up with a new concept for a new way to make motors or a new type of manufacturing process for motors. And so we got to talking and invested in that business and started heading down the path of making air purifiers, using this technology. And then we decided, what, let's just merge the businesses. That just simplifies things. And so, we've gone from, contract manufacturing out air purifiers to being a motor technology company, we bought a pretty large manufacturing facility here in Virginia. It's 156,000 square feet. And so now we're in the process of reshoring our manufacturing. And, we don't know what we want to be when we grow up, but we have this electric motor base that we could really make anything with an electric motor. And so there's really no limit. But the key is we know that we're competing with the imports, which are mostly Chinese products, and we're competing with them on price as well as performance. And that's really, I think, what separates us from any of the other American-made products is that there's usually a pretty high premium to make stuff here, but we figured out how to take as much cost out as possible and really compete with anyone globally. And so that's what it gets me up every morning and excited to come in here, because I think we just have so much potential. We have such a great platform that we built out, and it's just a matter of executing at this point.
Yeah, I'm thinking of kind of the importance of, and this is never something you're always going to know in the moment as an entrepreneur, but the importance of timing. You had an air purifier business doing pretty well. COVID hits, like, man, perfect timing, right? Like, got something that cleans the air right when people are worried about what's in the air, and timing helps there. Like, being able to capitalize on that opportunity is important. And I think this theme is a little bit less well defined right now, but there's definitely efforts going on. I think kind of like broader policy level of how do we reshore American manufacturing? How do we build things in the U.S. again? And having something that's building a motor that moves stuff and generates power in the U.S. Feels like it's probably a good tailwind to be on right now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was fortunate to be in the computer industry in the, late 90s, early 2000s when that was really cooking. And now I think it's clean energy is the next, there's so much money going into it. And we have a technology that aligns perfectly with that in terms of being the engine for so many of these products. And so it just like, wow, it to me, it's a little bit surreal because I remember, getting out of the Navy and my mom not wanting me to get out because she was concerned about me being able to find a job. And now it's
Right.
just a little bit mind blowing that it's like, how did you do that? it's such a, I don't know, departure from where I was. But to your point, I think timing is super important and having awareness for the market. I don't know if you've seen Bill Gross has a really popular TED Talk where he's looked at I don't know how many hundreds of businesses and was like, what's the most important thing for a startup? And it's like, is it money? Is it execution? It was timing is like by far the most important thing. It's like being in the right place at the right time. I think Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, he was in the right place at the right time. Like if he'd come around 20 years earlier, it's like there really wasn't the internet infrastructure in place
Right.
for that. But he was in the right place at the right time, and then he was able to execute, and build Facebook.
Yeah, and I think for the listeners on the show right now, it can be easy to kind of hear that and say, oh well, it's all just crap, and it's all just a crapshoot and just total luck of the draw of if I'm at the right place at the right time. And I would push back on that a little bit and say it's kind of recognizing like what the time and the place is and being able to capitalize on that opportunity and act quickly on it. There's plenty of stories out there of businesses who are doing something else and saw maybe the tide shifting to do something else and pivoted, acted quickly on it. Okay. You can think of a great example is Blockbuster and Netflix, right? Blockbuster dominated the at-home video watching experience for decades, and the internet was coming along, and Netflix came along and started off mostly with DVDs, and then said, "Hey, I think like people are going to want to watch stuff directly online. Let's go to streaming." And then here we are today. I think there's one Blockbuster left in Alaska somewhere, and that's it. So it matters too to just be able to act quickly on something when you see an opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. And when I look back, like to me, it's probably taken 25 years to get to where I am. Like it didn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's it's a journey, and there's opportunities, but there'll be future opportunities, and it's hard to know. And that I referenced AI earlier, but who knows where that's going to go. But to me, that's kind of what the internet was like in the early 2000s. It's like, how do you use this to your advantage, or how do you create opportunities out of this that maybe somebody else doesn't see? And that's really where the opportunity is in all of this. And it's easy to look back and it all makes sense. It's difficult to be in the moment and know necessarily what to do. And that's really where the skill and understanding timing comes from, is looking at the landscape and seeing what's happening, and then identifying an opportunity, and then obviously executing against it. So it's not as simple as being in the right place at the right time, but it's to me it's fascinating, and I think technology is going to be changing so much in the next 5 to 10 years. It's I think there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of it. And I think if you have a military experience, you bring a different perspective than someone that's been in the business world, and so there can be advantages to that. And so I think it's play to your strengths. In general, don't worry about your weaknesses, because people are happy to tell you about them, but really have awareness for what you're good at and just go all in on your strengths. You don't have to be good at everything.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's a great point for everyone listening to kind of encapsulate. Well, Peter, we're winding down to the last few minutes here, and so in a moment, I'm going to pass it back over to you. Just provide any last thoughts, words of wisdom, parting shots to the crowd. But before I do, there's a question I always ask my guests. And I said, if you can think back to your time in the Navy, what was the best and or worst chow hall you ever went to?
The best or worst chow hall? That's hmm. I'm having trouble. I would, it's kind of I was thinking through it. I've been on a number of different ships, and I've kind of spent a little bit of time in California. It's really hard for me to distinguish the best or the worst. There were definitely some meals on the ship when we were in the Red Sea that it was more a function of like what was available.
Yeah,
I would say was definitely the worst, when it was just the same thing every day. Uh, it was it was pretty basic. The one highlight, I guess, is we had a helicopter and they went to Italy and flew back some beer for us. That was probably the best.
oh yeah, that'll do it.
But
That'll do it.
yeah, yeah, that, I mean, that's not really a meal, but it was something that we were void of for a long period of time. But I would say, um, yeah, that was by far the best. And the worst was, just kind of, there was just days where it was the same meal every
Yeah,
every day, um, kind of prepared the same bland way. So,
yeah. I had a buddy who was on a submarine, and I think their refrigerator broke or something, and they lived on Pop Tarts for like 10 days straight, or something like that. That's all they had. Yeah, yeah. It's not ideal.
yeah.
Uh, well, Peter, I really appreciate your time this afternoon and coming on and talking about your experiences and everything. I just want to give it over to you for any last thoughts you want to give to the crowd as they're kind of thinking about what post-military life looks like for them and their families.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, I just think about, transitioning from the military to civilian life. And, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people, whether you're in the military or out of the military, we're all human beings. And I think just, one, being a human being, being empathetic towards other people is really important, and helping other people solve their problems will get you ahead. It's kind of like pay it forward type of thing, and really ask questions, and because some things may not be obvious, but there's I've always found there's people willing to help, and people like to talk about themselves and talk about like what their experience is, and you can learn from that. And so, um, I guess that's kind of leave it at that.
I think that's great advice. I mean, one of the things I enjoy about having this podcast is being able to talk to people and learn about their experiences and learn from it. It's awesome. Well, Peter, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Lots of good stuff in here for the crowd. And for everyone still listening, please like, subscribe, leave a review, and let me know your thoughts. So we'll see you all next week. Take care.